Hello, hello. We are live now.
Hello, everybody. Very happy to see you again tonight. So after having a talk about Scrum with D. Rhoda on the previous meetup, we are back today to the code. We are back to the dirty face of the agility, and so we are very happy to have three people from two different projects and two open source projects. From Speckle and from IFC.js. So we hope we have a very interesting presentation from their project, and we can try to see how agility could integrate with this type of project and with the open source vision. So as usual, we'll have a presentation of our Agile BIM community with Sebastian, and a short presentation of our sponsor Bricks. And after, we will start with IFC.js and after Speckle. So Sebastian, it's your turn.
Yes, hello, thank you. I'm not sure my presentation is sharing now.
No, I can share it.
No, it's okay now.
Okay.
So hello, everybody. So it's the last meetup of the year. I'm quite happy that we follow a good rhythm every month or every 2 months. And it's a great pleasure also to have these two open source project creators here, because I know this project from a long time from Speckle. And from this year for IFC.js, but they really changed the way to build the application and to use BIM. So here we are at the Agile BIM, agilebim.org community. So what we want to do is to put together all the people that are interested in using Agile framework, using Scrum, using Lean, or using Kanban, in the context of architecture and construction. And we founded this community like 2 years ago when we met several people from many horizons that was interested in the domain. And we have a meetup, we have a LinkedIn group, we have a Slack, we have so a meetup every month. And if you want to have more information, you can click on this link to have specifically the link to connect to everything. And so we organize a meetup every month. If you are interested to present, feel free to contact us. If you have either you have a use case about using Agile in construction, either you have software that change the way to design and that allow to be more agile. Any idea you have in mind, please contact us. After, on the agilebim.org site, we try to explain a bit more what could be agile in the construction. So feel free to read, and you can even contribute if you want. If you are an architect, a construction company, an engineer, you can also leave your name. So here we are not a lot, but I think there are many more that exist. And if we have a good list of people that already use Agile, it will be interesting. And you can join also our YouTube channel. So you can, this meetup is already in YouTube, so it's live. You could see, by the way, on the description at the bottom of this video, you will find a lot of links to connect with us. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, for the end, we are preparing an Agile BIM formation for all of you guys that know what it is, but you don't know how to start. So you can click on this link, and you will find you will register to an email sequence where you received every week a go-to an explanation of how to start and how to become more agile. So now I will talk more about Bricks. So Bricks, what it is, it's an application we developed since 4 years with François and Bilal. We are all architects, and we wanted a tool to collaborate with more agility in the field of construction. So we decided to create one tool. And what it do, it allow you to track all the topics that you need to work on a project, to historize the decision, to plan your meeting. after, when you have all these topics listed, you could add more detail. You could add some subtasks, some responsibilities, some images, or all what is needed to define what's need to be done. And as we are on Agile, you can plan your next schedule with a stage with this planning. You can define the stage. You can define the sprint. So the sprint is typical from agility, and basically it's a short iteration of work. And when you use this methodology, you can follow up what needs to be done on a Kanban board, which is the display you see at the right. So it's free to use, up to 3 users. Feel free to create an account, to talk about it, and to test it with your colleagues in your design studio. And this year we integrated a new EFC viewer. So thank you for the EFC.js community, because we wait quite some time to integrate one, because the ecosystem was not really mature. There was some library, but a bit old, not maintained. So since the EFC.js started to do their work, yeah, actually it changed really the landscape, and we could have really a dynamic community. Really, it is motivating to use it. So we have started to integrate this EFC viewer. It's not finished, but hopefully it will get better with the time. And the important thing is that once we have this EFC visualization, the BIM model inside the project management, we can really say that this tool is adapted to the world of construction, because we think that, of course, the 3D model is the base of the work in construction. So thank you very much. If you want to create an account and even to buy a subscription, you can have a coupon here with a good discount. So thank you. I will introduce Antonio from Sevilla, who will talk about EFC.js. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sebastian. Just if you can pass to the next slide.
No, the next slide.
Can you just pass to the next slide? Just I just want to say one, and to say to everybody to read this article, because yes, Matteo, when I found this article, it was 5 years ago. It was the beginning of the BRICS project, so I'm very happy to have you tonight. So it was one of your colleagues in the case company that wrote this free article. So it is the title of the first one. I think it's still online. And it was a very interesting article. So how to make issue tracking for the AEC. So it was one of the main inspiration of our BRICS project, and after about this Agile BIM community. So thank you for you and from Michael McCune was the original author of this article.
I definitely remember working with him on this project.
Thank you. So let's start with Antonio.
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's okay.
Yep, perfect. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. We are super happy to be here to share the work that we are doing. And yeah, as some of you know, IFC.js is a JavaScript library that we are trying to develop to democratize the BIM development game, right? And for those who don't know me, I'm Antonio González Viegas. I'm based in Spain, Sevilla. I work at Utility, which is a software development company in Norway, and I am one of the main maintainers of IFC.js. And my main focus is BIM software development. And, you know, sometimes it's really hard to explain what IFC.js to people that is not software developer, because this is mainly something that is thought for people inside the software development world. So an interesting analogy that we came across recently was comparing what we do with a fishing rod, right? Because imagine a world fishing rod cost $100 million, right? Probably in this world, only a bunch of big companies specialized in this business would be able to create their own fishing rod. And because they would be aware that they are the only entities that are able to have such object, probably the fish would be expensive. There wouldn't be much improvement in the fishing techniques because they would be aware that even if they put resources in improving their techniques, they are the only sellers, which means that they won't lose, either gain more clients, even if they do that. So it's basically a waste of money. And even if there's other people or small companies or even big companies whose main business is not fishing, trying to create their own fishing rod, that probably wouldn't work because as if you don't invest as many resources as they have invested in that, your fishing rod would be way more amateurish or not so professional looking as the product of the other companies, right? Which means that you probably wouldn't be able to compete in equal terms in the same market. And this is more or less the situation that we have in the BIM software market right now. Obviously, in BIM, we have many problems, and this is not the only problem, but many of you know this already. Most of you are familiar with this. We only have a bunch of big software development companies, which means that mainly because they are the only ones that can afford to develop serious or professional BIM software, because developing BIM software is hard and expensive, which means that we have a market of sellers, and in a market of sellers, the sellers make the rules, and that means prices that are more expensive than we would like them to be, slow improvement, difficulties when we try to get data out of an ecosystem and bring that to another ecosystem. So what we thought in IFC.js is why it's so hard and expensive to make BIM tools, because we think that one of the main reasons, because we have this problem on the table right now, is because we don't have many players in the game. And the three main reasons that we found was that, there's no documentation at all. IFC is hard, and IFC, as you know, is the main format when you want to import and export data from BIM. And also 3D is hard. And even though these reasons might sound obvious, that doesn't happen in other industries. For instance, if you want to make a video game, you can start right away. You can see free tutorials, and in a couple of days or afternoons, you would already have something probably very amateurish, but something that you can already show a finished product, and you can do it for free using tools and technologies that are open, like Unreal Engine, Unity, and Godot, right? So the question for us is, why don't we have such common base of technology in the BIM industry? Why can't we have this availability of the BIM technology that allows literally anyone to get into the game, right? Because obviously not everyone needs to develop BIM applications, but it would be nice that everyone that wants to get into the BIM software market would be able to do that without making a multi-millionaire investment. And that's the whole idea behind IFC.js. We are not creating an end user product. We are not creating a company. We are not selling anything. We are creating a fishing rod that is as professional as the fishing rods of the big companies, or at least that's the main goal. And this is something that anyone can use for free to create their BIM applications, so that if tomorrow someone wants to start creating an application to make, I don't know, structure calculation or energy analysis to create BIM models, whatever, they don't have to start from square one. They can start from square, say, 300, because the first steps are steps that we have already done, right? And because we have found that most BIM companies have developed their technology from scratch in private without sharing anything. So that's the idea. Why don't we develop that same technology openly and freely for anyone, so that anyone can have the same tools and yeah, technology as any other player, right? And yeah, this is something that 3 developers started. I'm one of them, obviously. We are from different countries, and these were the premises of the project. We wanted it to be open, completely free, well documented, and mainly community driven. Because, you know, even though I'm aware that a lot of times the industry that we have is very individualistic, our point is that perhaps it's pointless to compete, to try to develop BIM applications individually and compete against the giants, because we will never be able to, play in equal terms with those giants. Instead of teaming up and say, okay, perhaps I'm a smaller company, or perhaps I'm a company, I am a big company, but my main business is not BIM. I'm a supermarket company, or I am a big asset owner, whatever. And if I try to do this myself, probably I won't succeed, or I will do something that is super amateurish in comparison to the big players. Why don't we team up? Why don't we put common effort together so we can, in the end, play the same game, right? And sometimes, I'm aware that obviously we are not the first open source initiative here, and we are aware that a lot of times these kind of open source ideas are nice, but in the end they end up being nothing, because a lot of times they are completely dependent on the people that start them. And if one person gets married, other person, I don't know, dies or whatever, suddenly the project dies and nobody continues. And that is one of the dangers, right? So in order to avoid this situation, we are aligning this with the interests of the companies that we consider that have interest in this. And as Lucas and as Sebastian mentioned before, they are already using the library, and we have other companies using the library, right? And if you go to the official documentation that we have, you will see the list of companies using the library. These are some of them. There's also more of them on the way. A lot of them are really big, like multi-millionaire companies. And yeah, our idea is that we are giving those companies the decision-making power. So in the end, even though, yes, I'm Antonio, I'm perhaps the most visible person in the project, but in the end, I'm nothing more than another company that is part of this common consortium, and we are all building the project together. For instance, some of the functionalities that you would see today, like the DXF export or the PDF export, are things that my company asked me to do. And obviously, I could do these functionalities in the closed source of my company, right? But instead of doing that, I put that code directly in the library, openly and freely for everyone, so that everyone has a PDF exporter and everyone has a DXF exporter. And step by step, we are putting this effort, or part of this effort, in common, so that we advance in the same direction, so we can go much further, obviously, right? And this is IFC.js in a nutshell. This is what we are doing. And even though this sounds super idealistic, or perhaps not realistic to what we are used to in the BIM software development environment, this is the standard in any other industry. This sharing of knowledge and this open sourceness of the work is actually what happens in literally almost any other software industry out there. So, I personally think that we don't deserve less than other industry, right? I don't want to get in a lot of detail without showing you anything. So yeah, basically IFC.js is a 3D JavaScript framework that allows you to create BIM applications directly in browsers or in servers or in desktop. It's completely multi-platform. And yeah, it's super efficient. The first example that I bring today is something that I already showed in some presentations before. I think I have it here. Oh no, this is this. Here, yep. This is a super simple example, but I think it illustrates more or less well the possibilities of the libraries. This is Twitter. This is my Twitter account. And in one of the tweets, I've just inserted a BIM model. This is a simple model, but I could also insert here a complex model, and I can navigate around, and I'm able to create BIM tools here to interact with the model, to create clipping planes, to export the DXF drawings of this model, and I don't know, I can do some stuff here. And only this, even though this is a super simple application, I think this illustrates the power of what we can achieve with this kind of initiative, because generally we are used to think that BIM is what happens inside proprietary software, because yes, we all know that BIM is not a software, it's a way of working, but in the end we need software to be able to materialize that way of working. So with IFC.js, anyone can create this kind of self-made BIM super easily and adapt it to any use case, because I mean, I'm using Twitter here, but the same can be done in literally any other web page, because as you know, JavaScript is the language of internet, and that means that any web page is nothing more than HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, so that you can convert any web page into a BIM tool. And in this case, I'm using Twitter as a BIM viewer, and yeah, that's one example. If you're curious, actually, the way of doing this is super simple. It's just a Chrome extension that inserts an iframe. I don't want to get too technical because I'm aware that not everyone in the presentation probably is a software developer. But if we get super quickly down to the code, you'll see that actually it's just 30 lines of JavaScript. And if you take a look at those 30 lines, you'll see that, I mean, it's super easy. Like create iframe, get the tweet that I'm looking for because this was hard-coded for a specific tweet, and insert the 3D viewer in the tweet, right? And this is how easy it is to use IFC.js. Because again, what we are doing is we are taking the hard parts of creating BIM applications. We do them, and we leave them prepared and abstracted away so that anyone, even people that is not that familiar with web development, can create that kind of applications, right? And yeah, obviously you can use this to display BIM models literally anywhere. And yeah, another example that I bring, it's something that Harry did. Harry Collin is one of the main contributors of the library. You can see him here. He's here, right? You can check out his LinkedIn. It's a super nice guy. And he works at a company called Parametricals, and they were in a hackathon of 48 hours, whose premise was to create something that integrated both BIM and GIS. And this is what they did. And the only thing they did was use IFC.js for the BIM part and another library, which is called HarpGL for the GIS part. And in 48 hours, they were able to do this. This is a 3D of the city of San Francisco with all the buildings that are loaded from servers in real time. And they were able to locate this BIM model, which is parsed and generated by there's no communication with the server. I mean, obviously this uses the HarpGL servers, but in terms of IFC, everything happens in the browser, which means that in this case, Google Chrome is being used as a BIM tool. And yeah, this was done in 48 hours. And even though this sounds incredible, that's how it is, because in the end, the secret becomes this philosophy, or what makes this philosophy different to the philosophy of, you know, what you were used to see in the BIM environment, is that instead of trying to do everything yourself from scratch, you rely on other people's work. In this case, the GIS part was solved by a team of people that I think they are based in the Netherlands, and they put this work so that anyone else can use it. And we are doing the same with IFC.js, so that in the end, if you take one people work and another people work and another people work, you bind everything together and you have something that allows you to create super awesome stuff in no time. In this case, it was just 2 days, right? And yeah, I mean, I can go here. I believe I can change the time. I can change the hour, and the illumination of the scene changes in real time. Yeah, it's super. It's very nice. And this is just another use case of what can be done using IFC.js. Yeah, and again, this is possible because we are sharing everyone's work. Instead of doing everything like individually, we are trying to do everything in common. And for us, this is what true automation is about, because, you know, nowadays we see a lot of people talking about automation and innovation in LinkedIn, especially in the BIM environment, the very famous computational designer role that is born now, right? But, you know, to me, at least, true automation is not about creating a dynamo tree that makes your daily life easier. True automation is taking a problem that everyone has in the industry and solving it once for everyone for free, so that anyone else has to walk that path again. And to me, this is automation, because the next time someone has that problem, they don't have to lose time doing that. You know, instead of solving problems just once or collectively, so to say. Yeah, I mean, if you're curious, we have more less easy to read documentation. We are working on it yet, but here you will find a lot of tutorials, use cases, examples of how to use the library, and so forth and so on. We also have an open community that you can visit in Discord, and there we are the creators and the companies that participate in the project. Also, all the source code that we develop is open in GitHub. You can check it out, right? If you go to the IFC.js GitHub organization, you will see here all the code that we do. And also, we are trying to create an abstract API. And when I say abstract, I'm talking in terms of software development, which basically means that it's easy to use. We hide away all the details of working with IFC and BIM, and we make it trivial to create the things that you are showing in this, or that I'm showing you in this presentation, right? Another example that I wanted to bring here was a BIM viewer that is done in approximately 74 lines of code, which is here, right? Here I already have some of the latest functionalities, like the baked shadow here, which is something that I believe Forge also has. I'm able to select elements. This is super simple, right? But if I open the developer tools, I am able to see the properties, both direct properties, and this is the IFC information. This is an IFC. I am able to select that. I am able to edit that. I'm also able to create clipping planes, right? And I'm able to both have a fill. And I mean, this is a field section. We can see the fill inside the clipped element, and also edges that are customizable by category and custom properties and custom filters. And this is super. I mean, this already, in my opinion, looks nice, right? Like for something that is done in less than 100 lines of code, which is super fast. This already is something that you could present to clients, or a good starting point for BIM applications, and completely for free, and well documented. This is another example that I bring, the same application, this time with another model. One of the recent things that we developed was this, which is the generation of real-time floor plans that you can navigate. And they are not perfect because this is just the first version, but again, I think this is interesting because we already start having things that, the big players in the BIM world have, and we are giving this stuff for free for anyone to use. Again, here we can select elements, see properties, edit, whatever, right? I can go back to the previous view. I can change between orthogonal and perspective view, and here again I can activate the clipping planes. See the fills, see the edges, and so on. So yeah, super simple example, but showing the kind of things that we are doing. And all the things that you are seeing here are things that we developed in I believe the last month. The project is less than a year old, so we go very fast. And our aim is to be able to provide all the tools that big players have for free, so that anyone can get into the game having the same weapons, so to say, or the same tools, right? And one last thing that I with this application, this is another model, a simpler one actually. We are also starting to be able to export DXF and PDF. And I believe that if I press here, yeah, that's the PDF. And if I'm not wrong, if I press here, that's the DXF. If we open the PDF, it's not perfect. We don't have the furniture yet. We are working on that. But as you see, this is vectorial PDF. You can control the thickness of the lines parametrically, both by category, by custom filters, whatever. You can filter what you see or what you don't see here, right? And this is just a first version, but I mean, this is something that we literally did or this specific function is something that I personally did in a couple of weeks. So yeah, that's the philosophy of the project. I do that. If I do this in private, only my company have that. But because I'm doing that in the library, everyone has that right away without having to spend any time on this, right? And yeah, also the DXF is there. I don't know if I want to open that because I use ODA, which can take some time to open Let's see if that doesn't take a lot of time. But yeah, I mean, it's basically the same information that you are seeing the PDF. Yeah, here. But in the XF with layers, you can control the colors, the type of line, and everything, right? To create floor plans out of the IFC file, right? Again, just a first version, but the idea is to keep developing that. And yeah, that's what we are doing. That's what we are. Obviously, it's a long way, but fortunately, we are not alone. I think that so far we are like 6 or 7 companies that are involved in the project. And the idea is that, yeah, I mean, BIM is possible outside traditional BIM apps. BIM is not licensed or do not have to be licensed, so you can have your own BIM, both for asset management or for creating your own BIM tools without paying anything to anyone, not even us, because you may ask, okay, but why are you doing this for free, right? This is not a business, this is not a product, this is just technology. How is this profitable or how is this sustainable in time? The answer is that the money that we don't spend in proprietary applications is money that we are gaining, because otherwise, if we don't have this kind of technology, we either have to pay software as a service, which is much more expensive, or we have to directly tell our clients that we cannot implement BIM functionalities in our applications, right? Or we can try to start from scratch, in which case we will probably look super amateurish, because if we start from scratch, we have to walk a long way until we have this kind of functionalities that you're seeing here. Because we're teaming up, we are able to have that, right? And yeah, I mean, we have a couple of more examples. This is a simple BIM platform that I created in Google Drive, also for free. This is a short tutorial that we have in the official documentation. You can take a look. But basically, yeah, it was super simple. Using a Google Chrome extension, I was able to create an HTML. Let me see if I can magnify that. I was able to create a, okay, let's skip the ad. Yeah, I was able to create an HTML element so that this little button appeared in Google Drive when I right-click on an IFC that is stored there. And when I click there, this BIM viewer opens. This is a BIM viewer application that has the same layout as Google Drive. And that means that anyone that is connected to Google Drive and that has that Google Chrome extension installed would be able to use Google Drive as a BIM platform, where they would be able to open 3D IFC models, access the information, edit the information, create new information, and so on, right? And we would be able to make use of all the access control management that Google Drive provides to the users, right? Also, we have measuring tools, we have clipping planes, all the things that you have seen that can be done super easily using IFC.js. Yeah. And again, I mean, this is super easy. If you're curious, you can check the source code in our GitHub. In this case, this is a little bit more advanced because we are using Google Drive API, but I mean, this is just basic web development stuff. In the tutorial, you will see this diagram in which we explain how that was done. It's, again, simply a Google Chrome extension that creates a HTML button in Google Drive, so that when the user clicks on that button, it opens a BIM viewer as another application in another tab. And using Google Drive API, we download the data of the model, and we are able to display it in 3D, right? And we would be able to display multiple models. We would be able to select what information does each user sees, depending on the role that they have in the Google Drive folder. I mean, the possibilities are endless. And this is the power of this, right? I mean, in the end, we are just making the first steps of creating a BIM application, and then other people can come and use this to create whatever they think of. The possibilities are endless. Also, this is another quick example. This is something that we are working on right now. It's more or less, I don't know if this will display. Yeah, if I change this, yeah, I mean, we are also working in creating IFCs from scratch and edit. I mean, you can already edit and add new data to IFCs, but also we are starting to think to create geometric IFCs from scratch in the browser. And in this case, I mean, this is a super simple example, but we are creating this, which is a grid of simple columns in real time, and the IFC is being created in the browser in real time without needing to communicate with services or anything. Everything happens in Google Chrome in my computer, which obviously makes the implementation way easier to other technologies that you see out there in the market, right? Finally, one of the last examples that I bring, because a lot of people, I mean, everyone says that that browser applications are the future, but you know, most BIM applications are desktop yet. And you know, a lot of people, when we show this kind of technology, say, okay, this is for a wage, but not for a serious application, because they think that desktop applications are the only serious applications, right? But the reality is that JavaScript is also useful for creating desktop applications. So we have a Electron example. I don't know if you are familiar with Electron. It's simply a tool, a free tool that you can use to create desktop applications using JavaScript. This is it, right? I mean, it's super straightforward. I won't got into the details yet, but this Hello World application is something that I have here compiled for Windows. And if I double click here, we will see a super simple and ugly application, or we should see it. Yep, here it is. And this is a desktop application that runs natively in my Windows, right? And obviously this is super ugly and super simple, but then here I can start adding menus, I can start adding logic, I can start adding whatever I want. I can start adding things to, for example, export the IFC data or to databases, or measure the IFC and determine how much the building cost with price databases. Or I can perhaps, I don't know, create plans for the work inside, right? Again, the use cases are endless, and you can pretty much load up to large IFCs here. They will run smoothly. You can click on elements. You can, again, do everything that I showed you in other examples. You can do that here with the same easiness, with not a lot of code and complete flexibility. And this is completely customizable. And the idea is exactly that if tomorrow you want to start developing your own BIM application or asset manager or whatever, this is your starting point. You don't have to worry about 3D. You don't have to worry about opening the IFC, reading the information, editing the IFC, whatever. All of that is already done by us for free forever. And you can just worry in the features that add value to your business, right? And yeah, that's pretty much it. Also, by the way, in case you don't know, you can also create this for Mac and Linux. So this is completely multi-platform, right? And this is also valid for mobile phones and smartphones. You can create an Android native app that is able to open BIM models using your phone as a BIM tool. And yeah, regarding the next steps, we are, as I told you, we are now gathering a lot of companies. I think we are around 6 or 7 companies right now. There are more talking to us because they want to be part of the project. And we are trying to make this useful for the companies that will use the project and for the individuals that will use the project. So the idea is that if a company not only uses the library, but also contributes back with code, with sharing the posts, whatever, we give them access to the internal development channels so they can be part of the development process. They can make decisions of where the library goes. They can align the next steps with the commercial interests of their business. And yeah, basically they become part of the project that makes the team, right? And yep, that's pretty much it from my side. If you have any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Antonio. It was very impressive. And yes, it was very interesting to see. So for me, a lot of people are waiting for the next generation of BIM modeler. And so we have a remark on that from Matt Zoltan. And so you give us some clue about the the possible next generation of BIM modeler, and they are open. So it's a good news. Also, we can have just some technical question, I think, and we can have more general question after the Speckle presentation. So we have a question of Anya Gomez. Is Python works too? So she asks this question a few times.
This is for IFC.js, as the name implies, is for JavaScript. If you're interested in Python, there is a similar project that is for Python, which is called IFC OpenShell. You can look for it in Google. They are much older and also much more mature than we are. And yeah, I completely recommend you to go to them and check them out. They work in Python. We are focusing JavaScript.
Okay. We have another question from... Yeah, you can add it in the comment, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Also, we have a question from Rafael Silva Villanueva. Is this library can be used with? Is this library be used with Power BI? So, can you export some data and?
Actually, there's one user which is called Cesare Cauduro in Italian. I think he managed to bind this library with Power BI, because in the end, this library is nothing more than adding BIM functionalities to 3JS, which is the most important 3D library out there to display 3D on the web. And because 3JS can be connected with Power BI, so can IFC.js. So the answer is yes.
Okay. We have other question from Ole about creating some geometry in EFC. So you present us a tool to create IFC directly in Chrome.
Yeah, until now we have focused mainly in reading. Reading means opening big IFC files efficiently and running them at 60 FPS in a browser, which is not an easy task. We are close to be on a super interesting point. And when we reach that point, which I expect it to be like a couple of months, we will probably start putting more effort into writing and editing. I don't think we will. I mean, right now we are not focused in authoring because there are. I mean, you can see other initiatives like Blender BIM, which is focusing authoring. So we are trying to not to duplicate work with other open source initiatives. In the future, once we have all the, everything that Forge, for instance, can do, once we are able to do all of that, we will probably sit down and say, okay, perhaps we can start creating a geometric kernel to start modeling and that kind of stuff. But that is not the main focus right now.
Okay. Okay, that's it for the more technical question. So now we are introducing Matteo and Dimitri. So let's go, guys. You have a presentation? Yes, I share it. Okay. So up to you.
Cool. Hello, everybody. We're gonna do some quick intros, and then we'll dive into all the story about Speckle. I'll go first because then Matteo will continue with the presentation. I'm Dimitri, as it's written there. Yes, I accidentally gave birth to Speckle. This is a long story. It was during a research fellowship at UCL in London, and Speckle, as you know, what I was looking at the time was like pretty much the question was, there's a lot of digital magic happening. Why is the construction industry stuck within this kind of 1950s levels of productivity? Why are we not adopting everything digital and making our lives wonderful? And of course, as Antonio clarified quite nicely in his presentation as well, it's partly a big political problem. And anyway, Speckle was born as part of this, as a kind of way to, at the same time, define this problem, as well as try and provide a tentative answer. And along my journey, I met Matteo. He was one of the first contributors to Speckle. And yeah, fast forward, we started a company around it. Anyway, over to Matteo.
Yeah, so just going to intro myself very briefly. I'm co-founder of Speckle together with Dimitri. My background is in architecture and engineering. That's what I studied back in Italy. I soon realized that I did enjoy architecture, but I enjoyed programming, coding, technology much more. So I started doing that almost full time. And as I finished university, I basically turned into a software developer within the AEC industry. So I did that for almost 10 years now. And then jumped onto the train of starting a company together with Dimitri a couple of years ago, actually 1.5. But I would like to talk a bit about the process actually that took me here, and that's that started when I first wanted to code. I wanted to learn how to program. I was really fascinated by the fact that you could 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you could of course you can do this still now, but at the time it was quite a new thing, create websites that everybody in the world could access, see, and consume the content that you created. So that's one of the main reasons that pushed me to start coding. And how I did it was basically I picked some frameworks and started breaking them, seeing what happened, and that's a bit how I learned to code. And one of these first frameworks was WordPress, and WordPress is open source. So in a way, open source code, open source technologies helped me learn how to program and become who I am nowadays. And that's why since then I feel that every time I'm writing some code, I have a strong desire to really share what I've write, the technologies I'm using with others, so others can also benefit in the same way I've benefited from open source technologies over the year. And thanks, Antonio, for introducing the theme of open source. But what does open source really mean? I'm sure a lot of people in the audience know it very well, but there's a lot of confusion around the term. We can start by saying what open source is not. It's not a hype. It's not a buzzword. It's not, a charity. Open source is software that's been released with a specific license. And this license doesn't have to do with money. It's about freedom of the user of the software. This is also why open source once was called as free software, a bit like free speech. There are 4 freedoms that are at the base of open source software. One is the freedom to use the software. There's freedom to share it with others. It's freedom to modify and learn from it, and also freedom to redistribute these modifications. So if there's a feature that is missing, I can modify. I can also share it with others. These concepts are not new. They've always existed across every industry and field. Unfortunately, inside of AEC, things have evolved in a proprietary way. Let's say there's a lot of the majority of tools that we use on a daily basis are closed, are proprietary, and this means that we, as consumers of these technologies, we've lost a lot of the freedoms. We are surrounded by softwares that we cannot freely use, modify, or redistribute. If there's a missing feature in Revit, we just have to wait until Autodesk comes up with a new version, and fingers crossed they have added that feature. These vendors are basically forcing us to, use their solutions. So we're no longer in control of the data that we spend so much time producing. We're almost victims, and we don't have that many alternatives. That's why, I think about a year ago, a group of 25 leading architecture, engineering, design firms come together and wrote a 5-page letter to Autodesk. They've been complaining about, this gigantic vendor that just keeps increasing subscription fees and, never really delivers the innovation. I think they increased subscription fees of almost 70% over 5 years. But let's step back a bit and see how open source is actually challenging this. And in a few other sectors, it's been very successful. We can start with the example of geospatial information systems, most commonly known as GIS. Huge thanks to John Mould for actually doing a lot of the research on this topic, providing some of the materials, slides, and information. We'll start with the GRASS project, which is a very old software for GIS analysis. It was created as a solution to non-communicating tools back in 1984. Thanks to its interoperability aspects and modularity, it became widely used, and thanks to it, a foundation around the project was created. And then this foundation, in turn, fostered the creation of many other open source software and tools within the GIS field. One of these applications is OpenStreetMaps. You might have heard of it, but you've most certainly used OpenStreetMaps in the past. It's been an incredible success, not just because of the popularity or the technology, but mostly because it created a cultural change. It really helped normalize the concept of open source, and it helped create a culture of collaboration around it. Nowadays, governmental bodies, private sectors, academia, they're all using these technologies and modifying them and contributing back. We can see how open source help increase interoperability, innovation, also more importantly, accessibility of the OpenGIS data and technology. OpenStreetMaps nowadays has more than 8 million users, and its technology is being used by Facebook, Wikimedia, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and so on. A similar process took place in the building physics world, where actually some of the best solutions are actually open source. And without a lot of these tools, the built environment would be in a much worse situation than it is nowadays. I've actually used a lot of these tools myself at university and at school in the past. We now have an ecosystem of building physics tools which are highly interoperable and extensible. And it's not just increased interoperability. The main benefit provided by open source is the increased innovation. Let's take a look at Radiance, software that was developed in the 1985, more or less. It's one of the oldest rendering engines still in use today. And Radiance has pioneered really so many concepts that we take for granted nowadays. For instance, the concept of normal maps, exposure controls, the HDR formats were all pioneered by Radiance. And it was really the inspiration for many other engines, and it absolutely was fundamental to how computer graphics are nowadays. And all these innovations and tools form an ecosystem which now is even more accessible thanks to other open source software initiatives like Ladybug Tools, which has arguably changed our industry. Any architect now can perform very basic simulations just after watching a few videos on YouTube at almost zero cost, just the cost of learning and watching a few videos. GIS and the building physics ecosystems had time to mature for 20 to 30 years. We don't have the same for BIM. Open source hasn't really transformed, normalized the culture of collaboration in our specific sector. But despite this, we are seeing initiatives that are rising and are challenging the status quo of BIM and the wider AEC industry. For instance, we have communities like OSArc, which are formed by like-minded people who are pushing ahead, pushing the open source agenda in AEC ahead. And we also have projects like FCJS and Speckle, which we'll see a bit more in detail soon. And this enormous transformation of industry thanks to open source software is not just happening in AEC, of course. If we look for a second at the wider tech industry, it's been happening for decades. And just moving from the interoperability and innovation benefits we've seen, some of these companies are actually being super successful, also from a commercial standpoint. We can start with an example of Linux and Red Hat, which was sold to IBM for a staggering $32 billion. We can see how there's an extreme need for highly transparent, accessible, interoperable solutions in every industry. And as a matter of fact, some of the largest IPOs and acquisitions of the last years have seen open source companies as protagonists. So what can we do to really accelerate this process inside of AEC? Well, the first thing we need to do is really to stop seeing software as a competitive advantage. Companies like Facebook, Microsoft, and Google, they're collaborating on open source software despite being rivals. And this is because they're focusing their core competencies on their core competencies rather on their core infrastructure. They have understood that there is more value in building on top of each other's efforts and progressing as a whole. That's exactly what Antonio was saying before. And in AEC, instead, we have the tendency of trying to solve the same problems over and over again. I've seen teams within the same company who do not collaborate or share code with each other, which, it just sounds crazy to me. We need to slowly embrace open source and let go of proprietary solutions and lock-ins. Now, over to Dimitri to tell us how we're doing that at Speckle.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, Matteo gave a very good introduction of kind of what open source means, and it also means a lot for our company. I think the important point that we always try to put across is that, you know, it's not a zero-sum game. So if there's one thing that you're going to take from this meetup, I think this is something both Antonio, Matteo, and me will insist on. Open source is not a zero-sum game. We can all benefit from each other, right? And particularly in AEC, Matteo, next slide. Sorry, we haven't really rehearsed this handover very much. Yes, thank you. No, you skipped previous slide, please. Cool. So, you know, there's been a lot of gaga and there's a lot of talk essentially around like how data is handled within the AEC ecosystem and how bad data is kind of a huge problem. And that productivity levels have been stuck at kind of the 1950s and so on. And essentially, this is something that originally Speckle was designed to sort out, right? I started looking at why is this happening, and kind of, you know, the first obvious question, and this is where Matteo can go next, is like, are we just playing stupid as a kind of like as an industry as a whole? Are architects purely designed to work like this and engineers the same? Are we always so inefficient? And obviously the answer is no, it's not that. It's that we have essentially a very fragmented ecosystem out there. There's a lot of data silos that actually hamper collaboration and automation. The value of 3D data is ultimately stuck in most of the cases in proprietary file formats, which are kind of opaque blobs. Of course, everything moves very slow. There's very little incentive to innovate because of the software monopolies that exist out there. And the net result is that kind of data, while, you know, like if you're using WhatsApp or whatever, is moving very fast outside the AEC world, is moving very slow within the AEC world. And there's a thing that we have forgotten ultimately, is that, you know, when you think about digital communication, actually, we kind of got stuck as a bit in the fact that it's purely just a technical process, whereas it's actually both a social phenomenon that's actually reinforced by a technical process. And next, yes, and this is kind of, yeah, summarizing a bit of like kind of 5 years of research in one slide. You can see a bit of a shift, like prototypical systems that were designed to digitally support, let's say, architects, urban planners, and other people from within the AEC industry. They were looking at kind of specifically how to solve wicked problems of design, and their explicit goal was to enable data-informed dialogues. And this is what we call the pre-BIM era, like the papers coming from, let's say, early 80s even. And with the advent of BIM, essentially, like kind of the whole discourse shifted and emphasized technical concerns at the expense, ultimately, of looking at the social aspects of digital design communication. And several problems kind of arise from this, because we've been a bit, as an industry, stuck in the loop. Kind of there's 3 takeaways that I always try to insist on and explain a bit more in depth. So we're working kind of at the wrong level of abstraction. So in a sense, the standards that we have out there, they're like kind of what they're going for is kind of the complete standard. And this is akin to kind of building a bit of a Tower of Babel of specification, which results that, you know, things move very slow. If you want to create a new element, it's very difficult to create a new element, and it's very difficult to define your own language, so to say, of communication. And with Speckle, what we're doing, it's kind of like turning that a bit upside down. Can you stay on the previous slide, Matteo? Thank you very much. We're basically prioritizing composability over completeness. There's other kind of very important parts, like open source touches a lot on data ownership and residency. And when you have things being centralized by single vendors, you cannot essentially serve the semi-paranoid needs of our industry. And it's also, there's this idea about the single source of truth. And actually, in truth, design stakeholders and pretty much everybody within the industry is smart enough to kind of curate and ask what information they need for the job that they're doing currently. So how do we solve this with Speckle? Besides being kind of lovable open source, Speckle, what we offer kind of at our core is a layer of cross-vendor interoperability across kind of multiple software silos, and we enable essentially the people to essentially work from these native applications, send data to each other in a very native and fluid way, In the process of doing so, we're obviously storing this data, we're normalizing it, and we're offering it for consumption down the line via APIs. On the next slide, yeah, so okay, I think Matteo's on a different presentation, doesn't matter. So essentially what Speckle is essentially an object-based version control system. So what we do, and it's very important to note here, Speckle doesn't work with files, we work with data. So when you send data to Speckle, what we do is we take every single subcomponent of a 3D model, and that becomes essentially a row in a database that you can query and access transparently. This is kind of turning things around because there's no more kind of fixed boundaries around what is a file, and it also enables us to do kind of very cool things like merging and so on and so forth. Next slide. And Speckle is kind of a very cool product that people have been adopting from the ground up. So we offer kind of a lot of features that we can build on top of this data once it's liberated from, let's say, proprietary vendors. Like infinite versioning, that's one of them. Like you can actually, manage in a very fine-grained way who has access to what data. So you can share subsets of a model with someone, or purely like the whole model, and so on. Control the permission levels. And if you go next. Right, that's where we end up, because I think we're looking at the wrong slide deck ultimately. Right. But essentially,
I think it hasn't updated. Let me just try to refresh.
Maybe, because I added a couple of them in there. Ah, there we go.
Yeah, you have to update your page if you make some change, and you are in presentation mode. Okay,
nice.
So we can have some more examples.
Yes, a bit more examples. So for example, yeah, this is a live demo of how actually Speckle gets to work. So it's the first aha moment. Like you see Rhino and Revit, where it can be the same like AutoCAD and Rhino, like whatever, you name it, whatever application we integrate with. What we offer is this real-time interoperability. We see this as a kind of a wedge inside the system. It's a Trojan horse that gets to essentially populate Speckle with data. And in the past, this used to be quite a, like, probably you guys know this, it's quite a complicated operation. We make it kind of very seamless and fast and essentially real time. So there's no more attaching files, sending versions, or trying to figure out which is the latest version. You can actually check. You receive a notification in real time. If one party updates something in their environment, you get to choose whether you want to pull that down. And kind of the last part that I think is very cool to talk about is that once this data is inside Speckle, and Matej, if you go to the next slide, yeah, this is where actually kind of our long-term vision lies, and kind of where we see the most values. Speckle is not just a platform for end users, it's also kind of a developer platform. So you can actually start reacting to these events when people push data in and out of Speckle. And this is where you can start scaffolding all sorts of amazing automation, be it proprietary if you want to keep it, or like open source if you want to share it with us. We've seen things done from embedded carbon calculations on models that get updated, like, for example, also like quantity reports, various like costing schedules, pretty much like we're used to in the developer world. When we collaborate on code, we can instantly see if a thing builds or if a thing actually fails. Code gets deployed. We're trying to bring the same kind of principles of, let's say, continuous integration, essentially into the AEC world. And I think that's a wrap up from our end. We're happy to take questions, if there were any. I've been trying to follow the chat, but I
Thank you. Dimitri and Matteo. I like always when you compare the other industry with our industry and try to implement other way of thinking that are in the other industry. We start the same with Agile BIM to try to analyze how developers are working and to try to implement some of this way of working and the agile practice more specifically. So about that, I think about the concept of software forge. So you when you build a software, you take GitHub for the code. You can have issue tracking. You can have a different type of software. So for you, what is the equivalent of your software in the developer world? It's like a GitHub of the AEC, or?
Yeah, you nailed it. So I think the closest company, let's say, or analogy that we have that's closest to our hearts is GitLab, which is exactly as you say. It's an open source product that has proprietary features built around it, but essentially it offers kind of a continuous integration platform for code and all the automation that gets built on top of code.
Yeah, and for us to really advance as an industry, we see, a huge blocker so far has been these massive vendors, proprietary tools, and closed source solutions that really preventing us to get the best experiences that we've instead getting from native web tools. And for us, Speckle, it's really an interoperability. An infrastructure layer that we're building so that others can build on top of it and really, unlock the potential of BIM models, unlock the potential of data that, traditionally was stuck into opaque blurbs and files that we couldn't do anything with.
Okay.
We have Go ahead. Sorry.
No.
We have a question whether Speckle is meant from Leo to edit data on the web or in desktop applications. So we've noticed that if you drag people out of their comfort zones, like they start screaming. And essentially, like when you talk to structural engineers, when you talk to architects, there's so much kind of embedded knowledge in the software that they use that our explicit goal is to be the web between this software rather than actually tackling the authoring problem itself. This is where we want to be. So in short, we're not allowing any kind of editing currently. We do allow, like via the API, you can create and edit data, but that's purely kind of a programmatic event.
And what is your future development? What are your future development? Can you say something about that? Or?
Well, number one,
so much to do.
Yeah, number one, of course, we want to expand a bit the number of connectors that we support. So just going back to this slide, you see we quite have a few already. We have around 15 connectors that can send and receive data to Speckle. We want to expand and have more. We're currently developing an ArchiCAD connectors together with the Graphisoft team. They've really been extremely helpful on that front. And we have more. Tekla connectors being planned.
Yes.
There are a few Bentley connectors that Arup has been developing, and they're contributing back to the community. So this is on the desktop side. And then we have quite a few ideas of apps that we are going to develop on top of Speckle. We're still just on the planning stage right now, so nothing has been decided yet. But there's a lot that you can do with the data once it's inside of Speckle, right?
And do you take your idea from the community and how what people say?
It's a continuous dialogue.
It's a discussion.
So this is yeah, exactly. So yes, Janice, we plan to support Tekla structures as soon as possible.
Okay.
Yes, you're not alone. And to all CAD software eventually, Kudot is asking us. Like that's a tough question. So there's obviously
the main ones.
And so your idea is really to transform the files, the BIM files, into data. And do you think in the future AEC will be data only?
Files are a thing of the past, right? If you're working in a web native way, Google Docs, Google Drive, you don't need files. And so we're trying to get rid of them so people can really leverage the data that is inside them. But first, you need a platform where this data can reside, and we think Speckle is one place where we can put it.
Go on,
to make clear, we have nothing against files that are open. We have stuff against proprietary files. And then let's say with IFC, we were never as kind of, let's say, talented and resourceful as Antonio and Tom to actually be able to crack that one up. So yeah, our main aim is to make essentially data accessible and transparent. Like the Speckle backend per se, like you can actually it can write files as well. It has multiple storage layers. Like one of them is actually writing files, just as a example.
Okay. Other question: will Speckle be applicable to all CAD software eventually?
Matteo partly answered that earlier.
We're gonna try at least the main CAD applications on this. We have a community forum where we encourage you to, submit feature requests. So if there's a CAD software you'd like us to support at some point, just, post in there and we'll do our best. Usually we tackle new connectors based on the number of requests that we get. So the more people ask for a specific software, then yeah, that's going to be prioritized.
Okay.
And we've seen actually some very interesting dynamics here. Like, and again, this goes to the, let's say, topic of this meetup, which is open source. So like initially we were on our own, then McNeil helped us develop the Rhino connector and the Grasshopper connector. And now Arob is contributing 3 new connectors essentially to the Speckle ecosystem. Graphisoft, which is a smaller vendor, now is helping us. They're developing 1 connector for Speckle, and we're just helping them out. So hopefully the answer will be yes.
There is more
an optimistic view.
There is more engagement than in the implementation of IFC. Or?
We can't judge this.
Yeah.
But
and more generally, we can go to a more general question, and Antonio, you can answer also about what do you think about the OpenBIM ecosystem more generally, and the IFC. A lot of people say the IFC is the open format for BIM, and other people say, okay, IFC, there is a lot of problem, you can't edit it or something like that. So what is your point of view, and what is your view for the future of this format, or a new one? I don't know. Antonio, you can want to start.
No, I was not sure whether. Okay, yeah. This is just my personal point of view, but I really think that talking about a format is not very useful to the industry, because we have been talking about how to make IFC better for how long, like 20 years, and that it looks like that conversation is nice, but maybe what we need is not to create the perfect format. What we need is to make APIs to make it easy to work with them, because in any other software industry, there's no JSON smart institution. There's no GLTF smart institution. There's just people that sits down and make APIs, so it's easy to work with it. Because if you use Three.js, for instance, or any other 3D authoring tool, and you want to import OBJ or GLTF or whatever, there is someone that has sat down and implemented something that makes it easy to work with that. So in my humble opinion, what we need is more people programming solutions for everyone, not people discussing. Obviously we need institutions that are like a referee, like a neutral referee, like the Building Smart. That is super fantastic. But I think that we already have that. What we need on top of that is people creating actual stuff on top of that technology.
Doers.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. We agree wholeheartedly here, because again, IFC, by virtue of being kind of like proprietary or not proprietary, implementations being like half botched and so on. And to be honest, like Speckle supports IFC.js thanks to the effort of Antonio and Tom that I saw in the comments sliding earlier, right? So, this is when we actually first were able to engage in a meaningful way with IFC files, was because of Tom and Antonio spending their weekends developing a nice API on top of actually IFC files that we could use instantly, right? And just pick up. So this is, yeah. So sorry, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you for using us. Actually, a lot of people ask us, what if tomorrow there's a new format that completely make IFC obsolete? Well, I always answer that in that case, we'll probably take like a couple of free days have a couple of years. And after that, we will sit down and create new format.js. Because really, the format is not what's important here. What's important to us is making the technology available. Because yes, IFC is open, but it's also super hard to implement. So in the end, it's not accessible to everyone.
Yes.
So in the end, at least for me, what's important is not the format, but having more people working in open source and contributing and working together towards the same direction.
Okay, great. And so there is a question of Tom. You mentioned it. Do you guys see a future EFC-based revision? Do you think Speckle is a tool for managing revision? And in a way, like GitHub or something like that, when you can compare two files and see the difference and validate the difference.
You can definitely do that. Yeah. Go ahead, Matteo.
I mean, yeah, that's one of the features that we're kind of planning to implement at some point. We already have versioning at the core of Speckle. It's a version control system that we developed specifically for 3D design, 3D data. So we don't have the concept of revisions just yet, but it's something that can easily add on top of what we have at the moment.
Yeah, and when it comes to revisions and issue tracking and stuff, like this is where we potentially might move as a project ourselves, but we're also looking at things like what you guys are doing with bricks, for example. There already are tools that do these revisions per se, so we might just as well support you guys rather than us moving in that space.
Thanks, we'll try. And so to connect with our agility question, in which way are you working? Do you work with Scrum or one of these agile frameworks, or how do you implement? Do you implement agile practices in your development, open source development?
We as a company, yes, we do. Obviously, it's always been kind of a mixture and an adaptation, so to say. We have sprints, we have retros, we do a team radar. We just started that, and being a remote company, actually, we're slowly building these rituals that are based on, let's say, agile principles. And Matteo is actually the master coordinator. So.
The
Scrum
Master.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. And you, Antonio?
I think that our situation is a bit different because, as I said, we are not a company per se. We are like a group of companies working together in something that in the end does not report direct benefits, So I say that our case is super specific because the more open we are and the more companies we convince to join, the more money indirect benefit we will have. So yeah, I don't know.
I think Antonio and Tom, they're also working with weekend-driven development practices a lot, or used to. So
yeah, for this part, you make some sprints or things like that, or
no. Right now, I mean, it's super informal because right now there's a lot of things going on in IFC.js, but there's not, in my opinion, a critical mass of developers that makes us make strict rules, because our main goal right now is to convince a lot of people to join the project, right? So right now it's super informal, right? And I'm aware that I'm gonna regret this, but for instance, so far we don't have a test suite. We don't have. We still need to finish the docs.
Okay.
Sorry. We don't have anything formal right now. For instance, part of the time that I work in my company. Can you hear me? I think there was a short cut there.
Yeah.
So, it's
okay now.
I mean, right now it's super informal. Like part of the time that I spend coding in my current company. Part of that code goes back to the library so that everyone can enjoy that. And that's more or less the schema that some people have in the project right now. Also, obviously, I spend free time on it. So, yeah, I mean, it's like, it's an infinite task. It's something that will never end because it just, I mean, take into account that we are like literally a bunch of guys trying to make what the big software vendors did in years, but super fast. So if we don't sit down to code in the weekends, we will never end.
So what do you love, Dimitri and Matteo?
Sorry, why am I laughing?
Yeah.
Because it's a familiar story. Like with Speckle, it's kind of the same thing. And actually, starting a company around it only made it worse for me and Matteo at least. So,
yeah, now we can work full time on it. That means full time plus weekends.
Yes. So.
Yes, but it's it's engaging. And in the company where you work, did you see that? Do you see there is some agility practice that are that are used or that can be useful? Or?
Are you asking me? Oh, sorry.
Matteo?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, yes. No, Antonio? Okay.
I can go briefly and say that, yeah, aside from, having weekly bi-weekly sprints and, our rituals, I think, it's just a matter of communication and finding, the best way that works for you and your team. And maybe on our solution, Speckle, I think it does help with, speed of communication. And the main reason is that you don't have to send an entire file every time. You need to exchange information with another party. You can just send parts of the file. For instance, an example that we use often, architects need to exchange a structural model. They can just send, baselines or base geometries that, to the elements that the structural engineers needs instead of sending an entire file. So I think, Speckle as a solution can really help a lot, improving and reducing friction in files exchanges, information exchange in general. So it can be used as an agile tool.
Yeah, but do you see agile implementation in Europe or some company like that?
I've seen various companies trying to, learn from the development world. So also following sprints or working, using Kanban style boards. And definitely there are benefits. I think, the main one is that everybody's aware of what the others are working on, right? There's more transparency, there's more communication, and a bit more structure. And I think the main risk is in traditional softwares is the old waterfall method. So that maybe, what should be avoided because, setting precise timeframes for various tasks, that never really works. And it's just a waste of time. So people should just focus on, chunks of work that they have at hand and, work incrementally from there rather than, master planning everything, and that never works.
Okay, Antonio? Sorry.
Yeah, I actually can only talk for my company that does indeed use agile methodologies, but I think that in my case, it's a specific case because Utility is mainly a software development company. And right now, I'm the only one familiar with the BIM environment because our business is mainly focused in sensoring building assets and giving the asset owners the control over those assets and CMMS and all that story. So, the answer is yes, but I don't think it's representative to the construction industry, at least yet.
Yes, that's why we try to change that and to speak more about this agile implementation. And we have a few other example in our previous meetup of real implementation in company, and one very interesting in Italy, Matteo. Yes, with a famous Scrum Master. Sebastian, do you have other question? I don't see other question in the comments.
I'm sorry, in my in my side it's a bit noisy, but practically what I don't really understand is how Speckle, for example, could be used by any architect, because your presentation was nice but a bit technical, and any an architect that don't know about technique, about all that stuff, or he can use your product by you have an online service, he need to install it in his own server, or what he can do.
Speckle.system/get started, and you basically get started. It's basically you install a few connectors for the applications that you use. Those connectors add essentially 2 buttons, send and receive, to AutoCAD or Revit or wherever you're working, and that's it.
Okay, and more generally, what do you think about the maturity of the AEC community, architect or engineer? When you explain your product, do you think they can test it right now, or do they have to speak to a geek in their environment?
Anyone can start using Speckle right away, and we have a public server, so it's a server that is entirely free to use.
Yes, I already tested, but well, what is your feeling about is architect and engineer more and more geek, and it's for you, it's easy for everybody to install that, and they have the maturity to install that, or do you think we have to put more geek people in the architectural studio or engineer company?
But definitely, the more digitally savvy you are, the more you can get out of Speckle. And I think, usually computational designers, bit managers are the first to pick up Speckle, because they are struggling with interoperability with a lot of the things we solve on a daily basis. So they see the value right away. And the first one is usually interoperability. So really being able to exchange data seamlessly between a few softwares. But anyone can really benefit from Speckle. And just an example is we have a 3D viewer as well that can be embedded onto any web page, and we've seen people using that to share information about their projects on their own websites. Companies embedding models into their ERP systems, so sharing models with other parties, with clients or customers. So it goes beyond the interoperability, and yeah, anyone can use it that way. Any person that is able of clicking a few buttons, they can send it to Speckle and then start using it.
Yeah, Antonio, your point of view about the maturity of our industry about technology subject?
Yeah, I think that we all are aware that the industry is digitizing rapidly, and that means that, right now, probably not a lot of architects know what an API is, or not as many architects as engineers know. And that makes in my opinion, that makes the advance of the sector slower, because when you try to bring them things that are not just one tool that you double click and opens, they are completely confused, because then probably they mostly don't have the basic IT knowledge to understand what you are trying to tell them. But I think that is changing, and we see more and more people learning programming, visual programming. As I said before, now I think a lot of people suddenly has this computational designer, whatever that means in LinkedIn. So I think that express a desire of becoming more familiar with IT in general. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that's the tendency that we will see. More and more people using APIs, more and more people knowing the basics of coding. And I'm not talking about like being a super software developer, but at least being able to understand what an API is, or how to call an endpoint, things like that. I really think that will be the standard in not a lot of time. So yeah, that's my opinion. And right now, we call the people that are familiar with this topic geeks, right? But it's like the kind of thing that only geeks do, and then suddenly one day everyone does that, and it's completely mainstream.
Yeah, that's the same with BIM Manager. When I started to study that, they said that there will not be be manager in 10 years, but I'm not so sure of that, but more data manager probably. Okay, Sebastian, other question? It's an hour and a half now, so it was a good conversation. So thank you very much, guys. It was very interesting and a very good panorama of open source project in AEC industry. So we say bravo to all of you to develop all this tool, and I'll try to to test all this tool myself also. So thank you very much, Dimitri and Matteo, and we will see you next year, I hope, with other subjects about agility in BIM in AEC industry more generally. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.